The needle slipped, and she punctured her own thumb for the third time, but the blood barely registered against the dried rust color already caking her hands. Elara knelt on the flagstones of the eastern corridor, where they had dragged the Alpha King after the siege broke through the second wall, and the smell hit her before she saw the full extent of it. Iron and wet earth, and something deeper, something animal like the musk that rises from a wolf den in summer rain. She was not supposed to be here. The healers had fled 2 hours ago, when the shadow wolves breached the keep, and the guards who remained were fighting in the courtyard below, their snarls echoing off the stone like something from a fever dream. Elara was a thread mender. That was her title, her station, the only thing the Ashvale Pack had ever permitted her to be. She repaired torn uniforms, patched ceremonial banners, restitched the leather bindings on training dummies when the young wolves shredded them during sparring. She was not a healer. She did not belong in this corridor with a dying king bleeding out on the floor. But the healers had fled, and no one else was coming. The Alpha King of the Northern Realm lay on his side, with his jaw clenched so tight she could see the cords in his neck standing out like bridge cables. 3 gashes ran diagonally from his left shoulder, down across his ribs, deep enough that she could see the pale gleam of bone through the ruined flesh. His armor had been torn away, whether by enemy claws or by whoever had dragged him here, she didn't know. His breathing came in short, wet hitches. Blood pooled beneath him, spreading across the flagstones in a slow, dark tide that was already reaching her knees where she crouched. She had her mending kit. That was all she had. A bone needle, 3 spools of standard thread, a pair of shears, and a thimble worn thin on one side from years of use. She had grabbed the kit on instinct when the explosion started, the way another person might grab a child or a photograph. It was the only thing she owned that mattered. The standard thread would not hold. She knew that immediately. The wounds were too deep, the flesh too torn, and shifter tissue rejected foreign material. She had learned that years ago, when old Marcus the pack physician, before the healers replaced him, had let her sit in the corner of his workshop while he worked. Shifter wounds needed organic binding, living thread, something the body would not treat as an invader. Elara reached up and pulled the leather tie from her hair. It fell around her shoulders in a heavy curtain, dark auburn, the only part of herself she had ever thought beautiful. She had not cut it in 7 years, not since the night her mother died, and she had promised in the illogical grief of a child that she would keep it long because her mother had loved to braid it. She did not hesitate. She took the shears and cut a thick strand close to the scalp, feeling the slight tug and release, and then she began to separate the individual hairs, twisting them together between her thumb and forefinger, the way she twisted silk thread for fine embroidery. The result was thin, but surprisingly strong. She had always had unusual hair. Too thick, too resilient, impossible to break. The other Omegas in Ashvale used to joke that it was the only strong thing about her. She threaded the bone needle. The first stitch went into the edge of the deepest wound, and the Alpha King made a sound that was not quite human. A low, rolling growl that vibrated through the stone floor and up into her knees. His eyes opened. They were not the brown or hazel she had expected. They were gold, pure liquid gold, like sunlight trapped in amber, and they fixed on her face with an intensity that stopped her breath. She did not stop stitching. If she stopped, he would die. She could feel that truth in the way the blood was still coming slower now, but steady, and in the grey undertone creeping into his skin beneath the tan. She pushed the needle through the other edge of the wound, pulled the hair thread taut, and tied the first knot. Something happened. She felt it in her fingertips first, a warmth that had nothing to do with the blood. It traveled up through her hands, her wrists, her forearms, spreading like ink in water, and settled somewhere behind her sternum with a pressure that was almost pain, but not quite. Like a door being forced open in a room that had been locked for years. The Alpha King's gold eyes went wide. She kept stitching. The second stitch brought another wave of warmth, stronger this time, and with it came a smell she had never encountered before. Pine resin and wood smoke, and something underneath, something that reminded her of the way thunderstorms smell just before the first crack of lightning. It was coming from him. From his skin, his blood, the wound itself, as if the act of stitching was releasing something trapped inside him. Her wolf stirred. That alone nearly made her drop the needle. Her wolf had not stirred in 6 years. Not since the Alpha of Ashvile, a thick-necked man named Gregor, with hands like shovels, had declared her wolfless at her failed shifting ceremony and assigned her to the thread room. She had been 15. Her wolf had retreated so deep inside her that she had eventually stopped feeling it, at all the way you stop hearing a clock that ticks in the room where you sleep. But now it moved, a slow, rolling awareness like something enormous turning over in its sleep. She placed the third stitch, the fourth. Each one sent that warmth deeper, and each time her wolf pressed closer to the surface. The Alpha King hadn't spoken. He watched her with those impossible gold eyes, his breathing gradually steadying, and she could see the color returning to his face, stitch by stitch, as if she were not just closing wounds, but pouring life back into him through the thread of her own hair. She had placed 12 stitches in the deepest gash and was moving to the second wound when she heard footsteps behind her. Heavy armored. She did not turn. A voice she did not recognize said, "What is that Omega doing to the king?" Another voice, deeper, closer. "She is stitching him, with her hair. Get her away from him." A hand grabbed the back of her tunic and hauled her upward. The needle pulled free, and a single drop of blood, hers, not his, fell from her pierced thumb onto the king's bare chest. Where it landed, the skin glowed faintly, a soft gold light that pulsed once and faded. The room went very quiet. The Alpha King spoke for the first time. His voice was low and raw and sounded like it was coming from somewhere deeper than his throat, somewhere primal, and it filled the corridor the way thunder fills a valley. "Put her down. Now." The hand released her instantly. She stumbled, caught herself on the wall, and turned to see 2 warriors in black armor standing behind her. They were both staring at the place on the king's chest where her blood had glowed. Their faces held an expression she had never seen directed at her before. It took her a moment to name it. Fear. The Alpha King pushed himself up onto one elbow. The movement should have been impossible. 3 minutes ago, he had been bleeding to death, but the stitches she had placed were holding, and more than holding. The edges of the wound had begun to knit together around the hair thread, as if his body were absorbing it, accepting it the way soil accepts rain. "Come here," he said. Elara did not move. She was holding the bone needle in one hand and her shears in the other, and she was suddenly acutely aware of how she must look. Her threadbare tunic stained with his blood, her hair chopped unevenly where she had cut the strand, her bare feet on the cold stone. She was thin, too thin, because Omegas in Ashvale ate after everyone else, and there was never much left after everyone else. Her hands were calloused from years of needlework, the skin cracked and dry, and she had a scar across her left palm from the time Gregor's son had slammed a door on her hand for sewing a patch crooked on his sparring jacket. The Alpha King said it again. Come here. Not a request, a command, but spoken quietly, the way you speak to a wild animal you do not want to startle. She took one step forward, then another. She knelt beside him, because that was what you did in the presence of an Alpha King, and because her legs were shaking too badly to stand. He reached out and took her hand, the one with the scar. His fingers were enormous around hers, rough with calluses of a different kind. Sword, calluses, war calluses. And when his skin touched hers, the warmth erupted again, so intense this time that she gasped. It roared through her like a river breaking a dam, and her wolf surged to the surface with a howl she felt in every bone. "Mate," he said. The word was simple and absolute, and it changed the shape of the air between them. "No," she whispered. "That is not possible." Because it was not possible, she was an Omega, a threadless, wolfless Omega from a minor pack in the eastern borderlands. She repaired torn uniforms for a living. She ate scraps. She slept in a closet-sized room above the laundry, because it was the only place in the Ashvale compound that stayed warm at night, heated by the steam from the pipes below. She was no one. The Alpha King's gold eyes studied her face, with a focus that made her feel like she was being read page by page, word by word. He brought a scarred hand up to his face and pressed his mouth to the center of her palm, exactly over the scar, and she felt his breath hot against the damaged skin. "What is your name?" he said against her hand. "Elara. Elara." He repeated it as if he were tasting it. "Who did this to your hand? It does not matter. It matters to me." The two warriors behind her shifted uncomfortably. One of them cleared his throat. "My king, the south wall has fallen. We need to move you to the inner keep." The Alpha King did not look away from her. His eyes had not left her face since the moment he had opened them. "How many stitches?" he asked her. 12, she said. "In the first wound. I had not finished the others." "Finish them." The warrior stepped forward. "My king, there is no time. The shadow wolves." The king's voice dropped to something that was no longer entirely human. A rumble, a warning. "She will finish, and then we move. Not before." Elara knelt beside him and picked up her needle. Her hands were shaking. Not from fear, or not only from fear, but from the bond. She could feel it now, a living thing between them, pulsing with each heartbeat, growing stronger with each breath. It was like standing next to a furnace, like holding a live wire. Every nerve in her body was awake in a way it had never been before, and her wolf was pressing against the inside of her skin, desperate to emerge, to shift, to answer the call of the Alpha, whose blood was under her fingernails. She cut another strand of hair, threaded the needle, and began to stitch the second wound. This time, she felt what the stitches were doing. Not just closing flesh. Each pass of the needle, each pull of the hair thread, was weaving something between them. A connection. A tether. She could feel his pain, a distant echo of it, like hearing music from another room. She could feel his heartbeat, sinking with hers, gradually stitch by stitch, until they beat in unison, and she could feel something else. His wolf, massive and ancient and burning with a fury that had nothing to do with the battle, and everything to do with the fact that his mate was thin and scarred, and had calluses on her hands from labor she should never have been forced to do. She placed the last stitch on the third wound and tied it off. 27 stitches total. 27 threads of her hair now woven into the Alpha King's flesh, bonding them in a way that no ceremony, no marking bite, no declaration before a pack could replicate or undo. She did not know this yet. She would learn. The warriors carried the king to the inner keep on a makeshift stretcher, and Elara followed, because he would not let go of her hand. His grip was not painful, but it was absolute. His fingers were laced through hers, and every time she tried to gently pull away, not because she wanted to, but because she felt she should, that she did not belong here among warriors and kings. His hand tightened, and his wolf growled a sound she felt more than heard vibrating through their joined palms. The inner keep of the northern fortress was nothing like the austere stone corridors outside. It was built around a central hearth that burned day and night, and the walls were lined with thick pelts, silver and black and deep brown. The air smelled of cedar smoke and heated iron, and the particular warmth of bodies gathered in a close space. Dozens of warriors were already inside, some wounded, some tending to the wounded, all of them turning to watch as their Alpha King was carried in with his hand, locked around the fingers of an unknown blood-soaked Omega, who looked like she had not eaten a full meal in months. She expected whispers. She got silence. Total, absolute silence, the kind that falls when the most powerful person in the room does something no one can explain. They set the king down near the hearth. A healer one who had not fled rushed forward, a stout woman with grey-streaked hair and hands that moved with the brisk efficiency of long practice. She took one look at the stitches and stopped. "What thread is this?" she asked, leaning closer. "Her hair," the king said. The healer's eyes snapped to Elara, then back to the stitches. She reached out with 2 fingers and touched the nearest thread, and Elara saw her flinch. "This is bonded," the healer said slowly. "My king, this is soul bonded. Each stitch, each thread, it is not just holding flesh. It is holding you to her. I know," the Alpha King said, and his voice was calm, certain, as if this were not a catastrophe but a confirmation. The healer looked at Elara with an expression that was difficult to read. There was awe in it, and something close to pity. "Child, do you know what you have done?" "I stitched his wounds," Elara said. "I used what I had." "You used yourself." The healer shook her head. "Each thread carries your essence, your wolf, your spirit, your life force. 27 stitches, 27 bonds. In the old texts, a soul binding requires 3. You have created 27. There is no precedent for this." The king's hand found hers again. She had managed to pull free during the examination, and he reclaimed it now with a quiet, inexorable certainty, like a tide returning to shore. His thumb traced the scar on her palm. "Good," he said. "Good." The healer stared at him. "My king, you do not understand. If she is harmed, you will feel it. If she dies—" "She will not die," he said. His voice hardened to flint. "She will not be harmed. Not now. Not ever." The word settled over the room like a pronouncement, like a law. The warriors near the hearth exchanged glances, but said nothing because you did not question an Alpha King, especially not one who had just survived 3 mortal wounds and was looking at a thin, trembling Omega, like she was the only solid thing in a world that had gone to water. Elara wanted to argue. She wanted to explain that she was nobody, that she had no right to be soul-bonded to a king, that she should go back to Ashvale, where her closet room and her mending kit and her quiet, invisible life were waiting. But her wolf would not let her. Her wolf, awake now for the first time in 6 years, had curled itself around the bond and was holding on with a ferocity that frightened her. It felt like trying to swim against a current that ran through her own veins. She stayed. The battle for the northern fortress lasted 3 more days. The Shadow Wolves, a rogue faction led by a renegade alpha named Kale, who had been raiding border territories for months, had pushed further into the keep than anyone expected. Elara spent those 3 days in the inner keep, tending to wounded warriors, alongside the stout healer, whose name was Maren, and sleeping in short fits on a pallet near the hearth, because the king had ordered it placed there, and no one was willing to countermand him. She learned his name from the warriors. Darius Voss, Alpha King of the Northern Realm, commander of the largest pack alliance in the territory, and the youngest king to take the throne in 4 generations. He was 31. He had ruled for 9 years. He had never taken a Luna. That last fact was repeated to her several times by several different warriors in tones that ranged from pointed to hopeful, as if they were all auditioning to be the first to welcome her into the royal family. Elara did not know what to do with any of it. She had spent the last 7 years mending uniforms. Her greatest ambition had been to save enough from her meager stipend to buy a proper set of embroidery needles, the kind with smooth eyes that did not fray the thread. She had no framework for being soul-bonded to a king. On the 2nd day, Darius found her in the corner of the keep, where she had been restitching a warrior's torn jacket. She had not realized she was doing it until she was halfway through. Habit. Muscle memory. The needle moving in and out of fabric, the way breathing moves air in and out of lungs. He stood over her for a long moment before she noticed him. When she looked up, the fire from the hearth was behind him, limning his silhouette in amber. He was enormous. She had known this abstractly, had felt the breadth of his chest beneath her hands while she stitched his wounds, but standing he was something else, entirely. Well over 6 feet wide through the shoulders, with arms that looked like they had been carved from hardwood. His hair was black, cropped short on the sides, and longer on top, and the 3 wounds she had stitched were already reduced to raised pink lines across his torso, healing at a rate that even for a shifter was extraordinary. "You are mending," he said. "Yes." He sat down beside her. Not across from her, beside her close enough that his knee touched hers, and the contact sent that electric warmth surging through her again. She almost dropped the needle. "Show me," he said. She blinked at him. "Show you what?" "How you do it." "The stitching." She looked down at the jacket in her hands, confused. "It is just a running stitch, nothing complicated. Show me anyway." So she showed him. She demonstrated the way she held the needle, the angle of entry, the tension of the thread, the rhythm. She explained how different fabrics required different approaches, how leather needed a thicker needle and a wider stitch, how silk could only be handled with clean, dry fingers, or the oils would stain. She talked about thread weight and grain direction, and the difference between a whip stitch and a blanket stitch, and somewhere in the middle of explaining how to repair a torn seam without leaving a visible line, she realized he was not looking at the jacket. He was looking at her. What she said, suddenly self-conscious. "You come alive when you talk about your craft," he said. "Your eyes change." She did not know how to respond to that. No one had ever watched her closely enough to notice what her eyes did when she talked about anything. She looked down at the jacket and pretended to examine a stitch. "Elara." "Yes. When we return to the capital, you will not mend uniforms." She stiffened. "If you are dismissing me from service, I understand. I will find work elsewhere. I can—" He put his hand over hers, stilling the needle. "You will not mend uniforms because you will be my Luna. But if you wish to stitch, you will have the finest workshop in the realm. Any materials you want. Any tools. You will create, not repair. There is a difference, and I think you have always known it." Her throat closed. She stared at their joined hands, his massive and dark against her pale, calloused fingers, and she felt her wolf keening inside her with a sound that was either joy or grief, she could not tell which. "I cannot be a Luna," she whispered. "I am an Omega, wolfless. Ashvale declared me." "Ashvale was wrong," he said, and his voice carried a certainty that was older than argument. She felt it through the bond, felt the absolute bedrock conviction beneath his words, and for the first time in 6 years, something inside her cracked. Not broke. Cracked. The way ice cracks in spring when the river beneath it is ready to move again. On the 3rd day, the shadow wolves retreated. Kyle pulled his forces back into the borderlands, and the northern fortress stood battered but intact. The warriors gathered in the great hall for a count of the dead and the living. Elara tried to slip away to the kitchens where she could be useful without being visible, but the bond would not allow it. Every step she took away from Darius pulled taut inside her chest, like a thread stretched to its limit, and she could feel his attention tracking her even when he was across the room, even when he was deep in conversation with his commanders. She made it as far as the kitchen corridor before he appeared behind her. She did not hear him approach. For a man his size, he moved with an unsettling silence. "Where are you going?" he asked. "To help in the kitchens. They will need—" "No." She turned to face him. The corridor was narrow, lit by a single guttering torch, and he filled it. "I am not accustomed to being useless," she said, and there was an edge in her voice that surprised them both. Something shifted in his expression. Not anger, curiosity, and underneath it, that liquid gold warmth that she was beginning to associate specifically with him, with the way his wolf looked out through his eyes when she said something unexpected. "You are not useless," he said. "You saved my life, with thread and a sewing needle. It was not exactly a warrior's deed." He stepped closer. The torchlight played across his face, catching the sharp line of his jaw, the thin scar that bisected his left eyebrow. "Elara. 27 soul bonds. The healers cannot explain it. The elders cannot explain it. There has not been a soul binding of that magnitude in recorded history." He paused. "You are not what Ashvale told you that you were. Then what am I?" He looked at her for a long time. "Mine," he said finally, "and we will discover the rest together." It should have frightened her. The possessiveness, the certainty, the absolute refusal to let her shrink back into the invisible life she had built for herself. Instead, it reached into the cold, quiet place behind her sternum, where she had stored 7 years of loneliness, and lit it up like a struck match. She did not say yes. She did not say no. She turned and walked back toward the great hall, and after a moment, she heard him follow. Word traveled faster than horses. By the time Darius and his retinue began the journey to the northern capital, with Elara riding in a supply wagon, because she had never been on a horse and refused to ride with the king. Despite his increasingly insistent offers, the story had already spread. The Alpha King's mate, an Omega threadmender who stitched his mortal wounds with her own hair and accidentally soul-bonded them. The tale grew with each retelling as tales do. By the time they reached the capital, some versions had her weaving the hair into patterns that glowed with divine light. Others claimed she had cut her entire head bald to save him. One particularly dramatic version insisted she had stitched his heart back into his chest cavity with her bare hands. The truth, as usual, was stranger and quieter than the stories. The capital of the northern realm was a city built into the side of a mountain. The buildings rose in tiers, stone and timber, connected by staircases, carved directly into the rock. The palace sat at the summit, a sprawling complex of towers and courtyards that caught the light differently at every hour. When they arrived at dusk, the western walls were the color of heated copper. Elara climbed down from the supply wagon on stiff legs and stood at the base of the main staircase looking up. She was still wearing her blood-stained tunic. She had washed her hands and face in streams along the way, but she had no other clothes, and she had been too proud to ask for any. Darius materialized beside her. She was beginning to learn the rhythm of his presence, the way he would give her space, and then close it without warning, orbiting her like a planet that had found its sun, and could not bring itself to stray too far. "I have nothing to wear," she said, because it was the most concrete of the many problems she was currently unable to solve. He looked down at her. The fading light turned his gold eyes to bronze. "That can be fixed," he said. "Come." He offered his hand. She took it. And they climbed the stairs together, the Alpha King of the Northern Realm and his threadbare mate, his commanders trailing behind them in a formation that was half honor guard and half bewildered escort. The first week in the capital was a disorientation so complete that Elara felt like she was moving through someone else's dream. She was given rooms, not a room. Rooms, a suite of 4 connected chambers with vaulted ceilings and tall windows that looked out over the city. There was a bedroom with a bed large enough for 3 people, a sitting room with 2 fireplaces, a bathing chamber with a stone tub sunken into the floor, and a workshop. The workshop stopped her in her tracks. It was filled with light. The ceiling was mostly glass, fitted with panes that slanted to catch the sun from morning to late afternoon. The walls were lined with shelves, and the shelves were filled with thread. Every color, every weight. Silk and cotton and linen and wool and materials she did not recognize. There were needles of every gauge, from thick upholstery needles to needles so fine they were almost invisible. There were looms, 2 of them, one full-sized and one tabletop. There were dressmaking forms and cutting tables and drawers full of buttons and clasps and closures in silver and bone and polished wood. She stood in the doorway and could not speak. Darius was behind her. She knew without turning. She could feel him through the bond, a warm pressure at her back, like sunlight through a window. "Is it enough?" he asked, and for the first time she heard something in his voice that was not command or certainty. It was tentative, almost anxious, as if the approval of a thread mender from a minor Eastern pack was the one thing he could not simply take by force. She walked to the nearest shelf and touched a spool of silk thread the color of a winter dawn. It was the finest silk she had ever felt. She rolled it between her thumb and forefinger, testing the twist, the tensile strength, the smoothness. "This is Caravel silk," she said. "From the southern coast. I have never seen this much of it in one place." "Do you like it?" She turned to face him. There were tears on her face, and she had not even felt them fall. "I do not understand," she said. "Why?" He crossed the room in 3 strides and took her face in both hands. His palms were warm and rough, and they spanned from her jaw to her temples, and he tilted her head up so she had nowhere to look but into his eyes. "Because you used yourself to save me," he said. "Every strand." Without hesitation. "And now every strand of everything beautiful you could ever want will be yours. That is not generosity, Elara. That is balance. That is justice." She cried then properly, the way she hadn't allowed herself to cry in years. Not quiet tears, but the ugly gasping kind, the kind that comes when something inside you that has been held rigid for too long finally lets go. He held her through it. His arms came around her, and she pressed her face into his chest and sobbed, and he stood like a wall, immovable, patient, letting her grief run its course. When it passed, she pulled back and wiped her face with the back of her hand, and said in a voice that was wrecked but steady, "I will make you something. The finest thing I have ever made. But I need time." He smiled. It was the first time she had seen him smile, and it transformed his face from something intimidating into something almost boyish, a flash of warmth and humor that vanished as quickly as it appeared, but left an after-image she carried for hours. "Take all the time you need," he said. "I am not going anywhere." She began to settle. It was not easy or fast. The capital was full of wolves who did not know what to make of her. The court ladies watched her with expressions that ranged from curious to hostile, and the warriors treated her with an exaggerated deference that she found more uncomfortable than outright rudeness. She was introduced to the Pack Council, 12 alphas and betas, who advised the king, and they looked at her the way a jeweler looks at an uncut stone trying to determine value. One of them, a female beta named Sarah, who served as the king's chief advisor, pulled Elara aside after the first council meeting. Sarah was tall and lean, with close-cropped silver hair and eyes the color of flint. She smelled like leather and ink. She did not waste words. "You need to understand something," Sarah said. "They are watching you, all of them. The court, the council, the visiting alphas. A soul-bonded mate is rare. A soul-bonded mate who is an Omega thread mender from a border pack is unprecedented. Some of them will support you because Darius demands it. Some will support you because the bond is genuine and they can feel its power. But some of them will try to destroy you because your existence threatens everything they believe about rank and worth and blood." Elara met her eyes. "Who specifically?" Sarah gave her a look that was almost approving. "You are sharper than you appear. I have been invisible my entire life. You learn to watch people carefully when they never bother to watch you." Sarah nodded slowly. "Lady Varen," she said. "Darius's aunt. She has been positioning her daughter, Mira, as Luna candidate for 3 years. She will not take this well. And she has allies on the council." Lady Varen arrived at the capital 4 days later, and Elara understood immediately what Sarah had meant. Varen was not what she expected. She had braced herself for cruelty, for open hostility, for the kind of sneering contempt she had experienced at Ashvale. What she got was worse. Varen was polite, impeccably, devastatingly polite, with a smile that never reached her eyes, and a voice like honey poured over broken glass. She came to Elara's workshop on the pretense of welcoming her to the family. She was a handsome woman in her late 50s, with silver-streaked black hair, and the same strong jaw as Darius. She wore a gown of midnight blue that had been tailored with a precision Elara's trained eye immediately recognized and respected. Varen examined the workshop with the careful attention of someone cataloging assets. She touched the looms inspected. The thread ran a finger along the cutting table. Her expression revealed nothing. "My nephew tells me you saved his life," Varen said, settling into the chair by the window with the ease of someone who had been sitting in other people's spaces her entire life. "I stitched his wounds," Elara said. "That is all. With your hair." Varen's eyes lingered on Elara's uneven hair, which she had trimmed into something slightly less ragged, but which still bore the evidence of the hurried cutting. "How remarkable. You must have very strong hair." "Apparently." Varen smiled. "You know my daughter Mira studied healing arts at the academy in Silverhollow. 3 years of formal training. If she had been there that night, she would have had proper sutures, proper thread, proper technique." She paused just long enough. but I suppose improvisation has its charms. The blow was so precisely aimed that Elara almost admired it. Almost. She had spent 7 years in Ashval, enduring cruelty from people far less skilled at it than Varen, and she recognized the technique. The compliment that was not a compliment. The comparison that diminished without ever raising its voice. She picked up her needle and began working on the piece she had started that morning, a panel of embroidered silk that she had not yet decided the purpose of. "I am sure Mira is very talented," she said. "I would like to meet her." Varen's smile thinned by a fraction. "I am sure you would." She stood smoothing her gown. "Dinner is at 7. The king expects you to attend. I have taken the liberty of sending some suitable dresses to your rooms." She looked Elara up and down. "We cannot have the king's mate appearing at court in a thread-mender's tunic." After she left, Elara sat very still for a long time, holding the needle and looking at the panel of silk and feeling the bond pulse steadily in her chest like a second heartbeat. Then she put down the needle and went to find Sarah. The dresses Varen sent were beautiful and 2 sizes too large. Elara was not surprised. She had seen this maneuver before, though in Ashvale it had been cruder. Gregor's wife had once given her a coat for winter that was missing both buttons and had a tear in the lining presented with a benevolent smile and the expectation of gratitude. The cruelty was in the performance of kindness. She altered the dresses herself, taking them in at the waist and hem with quick, invisible stitches that Varen would notice, and everyone else would not. She appeared at dinner that evening in deep green silk that fit her perfectly, and she watched something flicker across Varen's face. Not surprise exactly. Recognition. The recognition of an opponent who had made her first move. Darius noticed the dress. He noticed everything about her with an attention that was sometimes overwhelming and sometimes like now exactly what she needed. He looked at her across the dining hall, and even at that distance, through dozens of courtiers and servants and flickering candlelight, the bond pulsed, and she felt his approval like a hand pressed flat against her sternum. She sat at his right hand for the first time. The chair had been empty for 9 years. After dinner, he walked her back to her rooms, as he did every night, their fingers intertwined. At her door, he paused. "You altered the dresses," he said. "Yes." "They did not fit." "No." His jaw tightened. "Who sent them?" She hesitated. "Your aunt was kind enough to." "Elara." His voice was quiet, but the gold in his eyes had intensified, and she could feel his wolf pressing against the surface. "Who sent them?" "Lady Varen. But it was a minor thing. I am accustomed to—" "You are no longer accustomed to anything," he said, and there was a heat in the words that was not anger at her, but anger for her, a distinction she was only beginning to learn. "You are my mate. My Luna. Nothing minor about you is minor to me." He lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles. "Good night, Elara." He left. She stood in the doorway and pressed her hand to her chest, where the bond was singing, and wondered when she had started believing that she might deserve this. The dreams began on the 4th night. She dreamed of wolves. Not the wolves she knew, not the grey and brown and tawny wolves of Ashvale, but wolves of a different kind. White wolves, pure white, with eyes that glowed like blue flame. They moved through a forest of birch trees in a landscape that smelled of snow and crushed wintergreen, and they moved in silence, and they moved together, and they moved toward her. In the dream, she was not afraid. She stood among the birch trees in her bare feet, and the white wolves circled her, and the largest of them, a female with a scarred muzzle and eyes older than the trees, pressed her nose to Ilara's hand. "You are late," the wolf said. "We have been waiting." Ilara woke with frost on her fingers. Actual frost. Delicate crystals of ice coating her knuckles, and the webs between her fingers melting even as she sat up in bed and stared at them. She did not tell Darius about the dream. Not yet. She held it inside her the way she held the bond, carefully, uncertainly, like carrying water in cupped hands. But the healer Maren found her the next morning, took one look at her face, and sat her down in the infirmary. "Your wolf is waking," Maren said. "It has been asleep a long time. There may be complications." "What kind of complications?" Maren was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I examined the stitches again last night while the king slept. They are gone, Ilara, absorbed completely into his flesh. But the bonds remain. I can feel them 27 threads stretching between you, and they are not just connecting your wolves. They are connecting your bloodlines. I do not understand." Maren chose her next words carefully. "There are legends, old ones older than the pack system, older than the Alpha hierarchy. Legends of the White Wolf line, healers who could stitch flesh and spirit together, who used their own bodies as thread." She met Ilara's eyes. "Those legends say the White Wolf bloodline was destroyed 300 years ago, hunted to extinction because their power was too great, too dangerous. They could bind any wolf to their will, any Alpha. I am not binding anyone to my will," Ilara said, and her voice came out sharper than she intended. No, Maren agreed. "But you bound a king, soul bonded him 27 times over with no training, no intention, no knowledge of what you were doing. That is not an Omega's power, Ilara. That is not any wolf's power that exists in the modern pack system. The frost on her fingers, the white wolves in the dream, the way her hair had been strong enough to stitch a dying king back together." "What are you telling me?" Ilara whispered. "I am telling you to be very careful about who learns what you are. Because if the White Wolf bloodline is not extinct, there are those who will want to use it, and those who will want to destroy it all over again." Ilara left the infirmary and went directly to her workshop, because the workshop was the only place where her hands stopped shaking. She picked up the silk panel she had been working on and began to embroider. The needle moved by instinct, and as it moved, a pattern emerged that she had not planned. White wolves running through birch trees. The thread seemed to choose its own color, pulling from spools she did not remember selecting, and the image that grew beneath her fingers was so vivid it almost breathed. She worked for 6 hours without stopping. When she finally set the needle down and looked at what she had made, she felt the blood drain from her face. The embroidered wolves were glowing, faintly like the glow of her blood on Darius's chest, a soft white gold light that pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. She covered the panel with a cloth and shoved it to the back of the shelf. It was too much. All of it. The mate bond, the soul binding, the workshops and dresses, and the Alpha King who looked at her like she had hung the stars. And now this. A bloodline she had never known, a power she had never asked for, a wolf waking inside her that might be something the world had tried very hard to erase. She slipped out of the palace through a servant's entrance and walked down the carved staircases to the lower city. She needed air. She needed noise and ordinary life, and the feeling of ground beneath her feet that did not belong to anyone. She walked until she found a market square busy with the afternoon crowd, and she sat on the edge of a stone fountain and breathed. The water in the fountain smelled of mineral and chalk. A child ran past her chasing a leather ball. An old woman at a vegetable stall argued with a younger man about the price of turnips. Normal sounds. Normal life. She closed her eyes. She should not have closed her eyes. The hand that grabbed her arm was fast and strong, and before she could react, a cloth was pressed over her face. It smelled sweet and chemical like rotting flowers. The world tilted. The last thing she heard before the dark swallowed her was a voice she recognized, though it took her fading mind a moment to place it. Gregor, the Alpha of Ashvale, saying I told you she would wander alone eventually. Leash or no leash, an Omega never learns. She woke in a cellar. The floor was packed, earth-damp cold against her cheek. The air was thick with the smell of root vegetables going soft, and the acrid bite of kerosene from a lamp hung on a hook above the door. Her wrists were bound behind her with silver chain, and the burn of it was immediate and vicious silver against shifter skin, a pain that went deeper than physical contact, that reached into the place where her wolf lived and squeezed. Her wolf howled, not the tentative stirring of the past week, but a full-throated scream of pain and fury that echoed through the bond. She felt it go out from her like a signal flare, like a lighthouse beam, cutting through fog, and she knew with absolute certainty that Darius felt it too. The cellar door opened. Gregor came down the stairs. He was exactly as she remembered, thick-necked, broad-shouldered, with small eyes that sat too close together, and a mouth that always looked like it was chewing something unpleasant. He wore the Ashvale pack leader's sigil on his chest, a crude iron emblem that looked as it had always looked, like something made by someone who thought craftsmanship was weakness. But here was the thing about Gregor that no one outside Ashvale would ever have guessed. He was afraid. She could smell it on him now, a sharp, sour note beneath his usual scent of sweat and stale beer. His hands, those shovel-sized hands, were not quite steady. He pulled a chair across the floor, the legs scraping against the earth with a sound that made her teeth ache, and sat down across from her. "You have caused me a great deal of trouble," he said. Elara said nothing. Her cheek was still pressed to the cold dirt. The silver chains burned. "The Northern King is tearing the city apart looking for you. My scouts counted 40 warriors in the lower market alone." He leaned forward. 27 soul bonds, Elara. 27. You know what that means, do you not? She knew what it meant for her and Darius. She did not know what it meant for Gregor. "It means you are a weapon," Gregor said. "The most valuable weapon alive. A soul binder who can tie an Alpha King to her will with a strand of hair. Do you think I declared you wolfless by accident?" The words hit her like cold water. She lifted her head from the floor and stared at him. Gregor's thick fingers drummed on his knee. "Your mother knew what she was, what you would become. She came to Ashvale to hide you not from the world, but from yourself. She begged me to suppress your wolf, to keep you small, to keep you invisible." She paused, and something crossed his face, something she would not have believed if she had not seen it herself. He looked tired, old. The lines around his eyes were deeper than she remembered, and for just a moment the fear in his scent was joined by something else, something that smelled like regret. "I kept my promise to her," Gregor said quietly. "For 7 years after she died, I kept you small. I made you a thread mender. I made sure no one looked at you twice. I took the beatings my son gave you, because every bruise made you smaller, made your wolf retreat, further made you safer." Elara's throat was dry. Her voice came out cracked. Safer from what? From the people who killed every white wolf they could find 300 years ago. Gregor met her eyes. "They are still out there, Elara. They call themselves the Silver Order. And they have been searching for the last white wolf for decades. Something shifted in the cellar. Not physically, emotionally. The narrative she had built about her life, the simple, painful narrative of an unwanted Omega, abused by a cruel pack leader, tilted on its axis, and showed her an underside she had never suspected. "So you kidnapped me from the capital," she said slowly, "to protect me." Gregor's expression hardened. "I kidnapped you because you wandered out of the most fortified palace in the northern realm with no guard, no escort, and no apparent understanding of the target you have painted on your own back." His voice rose. 27 bonds, Elara. Public knowledge. The entire territory knows what you are. The Silver Order will have heard by now. They will come for you. Then why not tell Darius? Why not tell the Alpha King? Because the Silver Order has agents everywhere, in every pack, in every court. Gregor's voice dropped. In his court. I do not know who they are. I only know they are there because your mother told me, and your mother was very, very rarely wrong about anything. The cellar was quiet. The kerosene lamp flickered. Elara lay on the cold earth with silver chains burning her wrists and looked at the man she had hated for 7 years and tried to reconcile what he was telling her with every memory she had of him. The time his son slammed the door on her hand, the way Gregor had watched stone-faced from across the room. Had that been indifference or discipline? Had he been too afraid to intervene, too committed to the performance of not caring? She did not forgive him. She could not. The bruises had been real. The hunger had been real. The 7 years of invisible, silent, small existence had been real, and you could not unmake those years by explaining them. But she understood him. For the first time she understood him, and the understanding hurt worse than the silver chains. "Why are you telling me now?" she said. "Because the bonds changed everything. Your wolf is waking. Your power is manifesting. Hiding is no longer an option." Gregor stood and his chair scraped again. "Your king is coming. I can hear his wolves in the streets above us. When he gets here, he will want to kill me. You will need to decide quickly whether to let him." She heard it then. The sound that Gregor's ears, older and more attuned than hers, had already caught. Howling. Deep and furious, the kind of howling that makes the air itself vibrate. It was coming from above them, from the streets of the lower city, and it was getting closer. The bond inside her chest was a roaring inferno. She could feel Darius through it, feel his rage and terror and the terrible focus of an alpha who has located his threatened mate and is no longer operating within the bounds of civilization. His wolf was at the surface. No, his wolf was in control, and his wolf wanted blood. The ceiling cracked. Plaster dust showered down. The building above them shook once, twice, and then the cellar door exploded inward, torn from its hinges by a force that sent splinters of wood flying across the room like shrapnel. Darius came through the doorway in a half-shift, which was something Elara had never seen and hoped never to see again. He was still human in shape, mostly, but his proportions were wrong. Too large, too fast. His hands had become claws, and his eyes were no longer gold, but white gold, blazing, with a light that cast actual shadows in the dim cellar. He moved like something between a man and a catastrophe. He saw the silver chains on her wrists, and the sound he made was not a growl. It was a roar. It shook the walls. It shook the floor. It shook something inside Elara that she would later understand was the bond itself, all 27 threads, vibrating in unison like a struck instrument. He crossed the cellar in one stride, and his claws severed the silver chains as if they were thread. The pieces fell away, and where they had been, her skin was raw and blistered, and Darius stared at those burns with an expression that made her heart stop. "Wait," she said, because he had turned toward Gregor, and his intent was clear and absolute. Gregor stood very still against the far wall. He did not run. He did not shift. He stood with his thick arms at his sides and his small eyes fixed on the half-shifted king who was about to end his life, and there was no surprise on his face. He had known this was coming. "Wait," Elara said again. She grabbed Darius's arm, the one that ended in claws, and held on. The bond screamed between them, her pain meeting his rage, meeting her fear, meeting his need to destroy what had caused the pain. A feedback loop of emotion so intense that her vision blurred. "He protected me," she said. "Badly. Cruelly. But he protected me." Darius looked at her. The white gold light in his eyes was flickering, his human mind fighting to regain control from the wolf that wanted nothing more than to paint the cellar walls with Gregor's blood. "He burned you," Darius said. His voice was barely human. "Silver. On your skin. I know. And I am asking you not to kill him. Not yet. There are things you need to hear first." It took every ounce of will the Alpha King possessed. She could feel the effort through the bond, feel him dragging his wolf back from the edge. By brute force, a king commanding his own nature into submission. Slowly the claws retracted. The half-shift receded. He stood before her, as a man again, a man shaking with suppressed violence, his chest heaving, his eyes still blazing. He pulled her against him with both arms and buried his face in her hair and breathed, just breathed, and she felt through the bond the moment his heartbeat began to slow, sinking with hers the way it had when she stitched his wounds, stitch by stitch, beat by beat. "Speak," he said to Gregor without lifting his face from her hair. "You have until she stops me. That is all the mercy you get." Gregor spoke. He told Darius everything he had told Elara about her mother, about the White Wolf bloodline, about the Silver Order and their agents. Darius listened without moving, without releasing Elara, without looking away from the far wall, where his eyes were fixed on a point that only he could see. When Gregor finished, the cellar was very quiet. Darius said, "You will remain in the capital under guard. If what you have said is true, I will need you alive. If it is false, you will wish I had killed you tonight." It was not forgiveness. It was not mercy. It was strategy, and Gregor recognized it as such, and nodded and said nothing more. They returned to the palace in the dark. Darius carried her up the carved staircases, because the silver burns on her wrists had left her weak and trembling, and because his wolf would not permit her feet to touch the ground while she was hurt. She protested twice, and he ignored her both times, and eventually she stopped protesting and pressed her face into his neck and breathed in his scent, pine, and thunderstorm, and let the bond rock her like a current. In her rooms, Maren treated the silver burns with a poultice that smelled of calendula, and rendered fat, and wrapped her wrists in clean linen, and looked at Darius with the kind of expression that veteran healers reserve for alphas, who are barely holding themselves together. "She needs rest," Maren said. "I know. And you need to leave the room so she can sleep, without your wolf pacing at the foot of the bed like a caged animal." Darius looked at Elara. She was propped against the headboard, her bandaged wrists resting in her lap, her eyes half closed. Through the bond, she felt his reluctance to leave a physical ache, as if the thought of being on the other side of a closed door from her was an injury of its own. "Go," she said softly. "I will be here in the morning." He crossed the room and knelt beside the bed, bringing his eyes level with hers. He lifted one of her bandaged hands and pressed his lips to the linen just above the wound. "Every scar they gave you," he said, "every burn, every hungry night, I will repay them all. Not in kind, Elara, in magnitude." He left. Maren left. The room was quiet, except for the crackle of the fire and the distant sound of the city settling into night. Elara dreamed of white wolves again. They were closer this time. The female with the scarred muzzle stood directly before her, so close Elara could see the individual hairs of her coat, each one shimmering with that pale blue-white glow. "You are nearly ready," the wolf said. "The bonds have woken what was sleeping. But the thread is not finished." "What thread?" Elara asked. "You know," the wolf said. "You have always known. You are a thread-mender, are you not? What do you do? With broken things I repair them. Then repair yourself." She woke at dawn with her wolf pressing against the inside of her skin so insistently that it hurt. Not the vague stirring of the past week, but a sustained grinding pressure like something trying to be born. She got out of bed. Her wrists ached beneath the bandages. She walked to the workshop and stood in the center of the room in the early light coming through the glass ceiling, and she closed her eyes and reached inward. Her wolf was there, not the small, cowering thing she had imagined all these years. It was massive, radiant, white as a birch grove in winter, with eyes that burned blue. It had been folded up inside her, compressed, suppressed, pushed down so deep that even she had forgotten it was there. But the soul bonds had done what Gregor's suppression could not prevent forever. They had cracked the seal. And now the wolf was rising. She felt the shift begin. It started in her spine, a cascading series of cracks and reorganizations that should have been painful, but were not, that felt, instead like a long-held breath finally being released. Her bones lengthened, her muscles reformed, her skin rippled, and then split open along invisible seams, not tearing but unfurling, and white fur spilled out of her like light pouring through curtains. She dropped to all fours. The world changed. Colors dimmed, but edges sharpened, every surface suddenly etched in crystalline detail. Sounds expanded. She could hear the heartbeat of a mouse in the walls. She could hear Darius's heartbeat 3 floors below, strong and steady, and she could hear the exact moment it stuttered and then accelerated, because he felt it too. Through the bond. He felt her wolf emerge. She was enormous, much larger than an Omega wolf, should be larger even than a standard Alpha, and her coat glowed with that pale blue-white light she had seen in the dreams. She caught her reflection in the glass ceiling, a vast white wolf standing in a workshop full of thread and needles, and the absurdity of it, the incongruity, almost made her laugh. Almost. Wolves do not laugh. But her tail twitched once, and that was close enough. The door burst open. Darius stood in the frame, barefoot, bare-chested, wearing only the loose trousers he had slept in, and she could see the raised pink lines of the scars where her stitches had been. His eyes were blazing gold, and his wolf was so close to the surface that she could see it in the way he moved, the predatory roll of his shoulders, the slight elongation of his canines. He stared at her. His white wolf. His mate. Standing in the morning light, glowing, impossible, the last of a bloodline the world had tried to extinguish 3 centuries ago. He dropped to his knees. Not in submission, an Alpha King does not submit, but in reverence, in awe. He knelt on the workshop floor, and she padded toward him, her massive paws soundless on the stone, and she pressed her head against his chest. His arms came around her neck. She felt his face in her fur, felt the dampness there, and realized with a shock that penetrated even the otherness of wolf mind that the Alpha King of the Northern Realm was weeping. The bond between them, all 27 threads, sang. Word of her shift traveled through the palace within the hour. By noon, the entire capital knew. The Alpha King's mate was not an Omega. She was a white wolf, the first to walk the earth in 300 years, and she was soul bonded to the king with a strength that the healers and elders could not quantify. Sarah arrived at the workshop at midday with a look on her face that was half wonder and half strategic calculation. "We need to talk," she said. They talked. Sarah laid out the political landscape with her characteristic bluntness. The revelation of a white wolf would split the Pack Alliance. Some factions would see Elara as sacred a gift from the old gods, a sign of favor. Others would see her as a threat, a weapon that could bind alphas against their will, a power that had been destroyed for a reason. And the Silver Order, Sarah said, if Gregor's story is true, they will move quickly. They will not want a white wolf, bonded to the most powerful alpha in the territory. They will either try to capture her or kill her. Neither of those things will happen, Darius said from the doorway. He had been listening. Sarah did not flinch. She rarely did. My king desire is not strategy. We need a plan. The plan, when it took shape over the following days, was Sarah's design. She was good at this, the chess game of politics, the anticipation of moves and countermoves. Elara watched her work and felt a grudging admiration that gradually became something closer to friendship. But it was Varen who made the first move, and she made it before the plan was ready. Elara was in her workshop on the 6th day, after her shift working on a piece that had consumed her since the morning she shifted. It was a cloak. She was weaving it on the full-sized loom, and she was weaving it with her own hair strands, cut carefully and twisted into thread the way she had done that first night in the corridor. But this time, she knew what she was doing. Each thread hummed with the pale blue-white light of her wolf. Each pass of the shuttle sent a pulse through the bond that she could feel in her teeth. She was making armor. Not the metal and leather kind. The kind that could not be removed, could not be penetrated, could not be severed. A cloak woven from soul bonds, each thread a tether between her and Darius, reinforcing the 27 original bonds until they were not a chain, but a fabric, a living garment that would wrap around them both. She was so absorbed in the work that she did not hear the door open. The needle that went into her neck was thin and precise, and the poison on it worked fast. Her vision blurred. Her hands went slack on the shuttle. She slid from the loom bench to the floor, and the last thing she saw before the dark took her was Varen's midnight blue gown, and the polished tips of her shoes standing close, very close, and a voice saying, "I am sorry, child. Truly. But you should never have come here." She did not lose consciousness entirely. The poison held her in a twilight state, aware but unable to move, able to hear but not respond. She felt herself being lifted, carried, moved through corridors she could sense but not see. She felt the bond stretching, straining, screaming. And then she felt Darius, through the bond. Not his presence, but his absence, a sudden devastating silence, as if someone had cut 27 strings on an instrument all at once. The cloak. The unfinished cloak was still on the loom, and without it, without the reinforcement she had been building, the bonds were vulnerable. The poison was doing something to them, dissolving them, unwinding them, and as each one frayed, she felt herself being cut loose from the man she loved. No, not loved. She had not said it, had not allowed herself to think it, because the word was too enormous and too dangerous, and she was still after everything, the girl who ate scraps in a closet room and believed she did not deserve beautiful things. She loved him. She loved the way he knelt in workshops, the way he pressed his lips to her scars, the way he said her name like he was tasting it, the way he had wept in her fur, the way he had asked, "Is it enough?" and meant it truly meant it. The Alpha King of the Northern Realm, genuinely anxious about whether a thread mender was pleased with his gift. The bonds were fraying, and she loved him, and she was going to lose him. No. The word came from somewhere deeper than thought, from the place where her wolf lived, the enormous, glowing, impossible wolf that had been sleeping for 22 years and was not it, turned out accustomed to being told what it could not do. Her wolf pushed through the poison, like a river pushing through a dam. White light erupted from her skin so bright that even through her closed eyes she could see it. She heard Varen gasp. She heard whoever was carrying her drop her. She hit the ground, and the impact jarred something loose, and she shifted. The transformation was explosive. Not the gentle unfurling of the workshop, but a detonation, white fur and blue-white light, and a wolf the size of a small horse crouching in the corridor of the palace with her teeth bared and her eyes blazing. Varen was backing away. She had 2 men with her hired wolves, not pack members, their eyes wide, with the particular terror of people who have realized they are prey. Elara did not attack. She reached through the fraying bonds, found the last 3 that still held and poured herself into them. Everything she was, everything she had been, the thread mender, the Omega, the invisible girl, the white wolf, the woman who loved a king she did not believe she deserved. She sent it all down those 3 remaining threads, like fire down a fuse. And Darius answered. The sound of his wolf shook the palace. Not a howl, something beyond a howl, deeper and more primal, the sound of an alpha whose soul bonds have been tampered with, and whose mate is in danger, and whose patience, which was never abundant to begin with, has been entirely and catastrophically exhausted. He came through the wall, not through a door, through the wall, in full wolf form, which she had never seen, an enormous black wolf with gold eyes and jaws that could close around a man's torso. Plaster and stone exploded outward, and he landed in the corridor between Elara and Varen, and his snarl dropped every wolf in the hallway to their knees, including Varen. Elara watched the king's aunt kneel, watched the proud, precise, devastatingly polite woman who had sent dresses that were too large and poisoned needles that were too small fall to her knees on the ruined floor and bow her head. And even now, even on her knees, Varen's posture was impeccable, her spine straight, her hands folded. I acted to protect the family, Varen said. Her voice was steady, though Elara could smell her fear sharp and acrid. A white wolf soul-bonded to the king makes our entire line a target. The Silver Order will not stop at her. They will come for you, for your heirs, for every Voss who carries the bond in their blood. I did what I believed was necessary to prevent a genocide. Darius shifted back. He stood naked and furious in the ruined corridor, and his voice, when he spoke, was so controlled it was more frightening than any roar. You poisoned my mate. You tried to dissolve our bond. He paused. And you did it because you were afraid. I did it because someone had to think clearly, Varen said. And you have not thought clearly since the moment she touched you. There was a silence. Then Darius said, You are right. I have not. She walked into my life covered in my blood with a needle in her hand, and I have not had a clear thought since. He looked at Elara. His gold eyes were steady, and I would not trade a single muddled moment of it for all the clarity in the world. He turned back to Varen. You will be confined to your quarters. Your daughter Mara will be sent to the eastern provinces with an escort. Your allies on the council will be questioned. If any of them are connected to the Silver Order, they will be dealt with accordingly." He stepped closer to his aunt. "And if you ever touch my mate again, I will not stop to listen to your reasoning." "Do you understand me, Varen?" Varen looked up at him. For the first time, the mask slipped. Beneath the composure and the politics and the perfectly tailored gowns, Elara saw something she recognized. A woman who had spent her entire life trying to keep her family safe, using the only tools she had. Bad tools. Cruel tools. But tools motivated by something more complicated than ambition. "I understand," Varen said. And then quieter directed at Elara, with eyes that held something too complicated to be called an apology, but too real to be dismissed. "I was not lying. I was sorry." The corridor emptied. Varen was escorted away. The hired wolves were taken to the cells. Maren arrived and examined Elara and declared the poison neutralized by the shift and the bonds, damaged but recovering. 3 had been fully dissolved. 24 remained, still unprecedented, still stronger than anything in recorded history. Darius stayed with her through the night. They lay in her bed together for the first time, not as lovers, but as wounded creatures pressing close for warmth. His body curved around hers, his arm across her waist, his face in her hair. She could feel the 3 missing bonds, like phantom limbs, empty spaces in the fabric between them. It hurt. "I will fix it," she whispered. He pulled her closer. "You do not need to fix anything. I am a thread mender. Fixing things is what I do." She felt his smile against the back of her neck. "You are a white wolf. I am a white wolf who fixes things." He laughed, low and quiet and genuine, and she had never heard him laugh before, and it was, she decided, the best sound she had ever heard. Better than thread pulling smoothly through silk. Better than the hum of a loom in motion. Better than the singing of the bonds. The next morning she returned to the workshop and finished the cloak. It took her 3 days. She wove with a focus and intensity that bordered on trance, her wolf light glowing steadily from her fingers as she worked. She did not eat at the loom, though Darius brought food and set it beside her with a patience that would have stunned his warriors. She ate when she could bear to stop in short breaks, standing at the window looking out at the city she was beginning to think of as home. The cloak, when it was finished, was extraordinary. It was not white as she had expected. It was every color. The hair thread infused with her wolf light had transformed during the weaving into something that shifted and changed depending on the angle and the light. In the morning sun it was gold. In the evening, deep blue. In firelight it glowed with a warm amber that made it look like it was woven from captured flame. It was light as gossamer and strong as steel, and when she held it up to the light, she could see the bond pattern woven into the fabric, 27 lines that connected and intersected in a design that reminded her of constellations. No, not 27. She looked more closely. 30. The 3 dissolved bonds had been replaced. The weaving had repaired them. She had stitched the bond back together the way she stitched everything, with patience, with craft, with her own substance. She brought the cloak to Darius in the great hall where he was meeting with the council. She walked in without announcement, without permission, without apology, and every head in the room turned. She was wearing the green silk dress she had altered, and her hair, still shorter than it had once been, was beginning to grow back in soft waves that curled around her jaw. She stood before the Alpha King and held out the cloak. He looked at it, then at her. "What is this?" he asked. "The first thing I have ever made that was not a repair," she said. "It is for you. Put it on." He stood. He took the cloak from her hands, and as his fingers touched the fabric, light rippled through it, gold, meeting blue-white, their wolves greeting each other through the thread. He swung it over his shoulders, and the cloak settled against him, as if it had been designed for his exact body, which it had, because she had measured him in her mind with the same precision she brought to every stitch. The room was silent. The cloak blazed, gold and white and blue and amber colors cascading through the fabric like northern lights, and the bonds, all 30 of them, locked into place with an almost audible click, each one a thread connecting the king to his mate, binding them in a way that no poison, no politics, no silver order could ever dissolve. "Now try to take him from me," Elara said. She said it quietly, but her wolf was in her voice, and the words carried to every corner of the hall. Darius looked down at her. His gold eyes were bright. The cloak rippled behind him. "No one will take me from you," he said, "and no one will take you from me. Not in this life. Not in any other." He turned to the council. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "The Luna of the Northern Realm stands before you. My mate, my soul bond. A white wolf of the old blood returned to us after 300 years. Any wolf who questions her right to stand at my side will answer to me personally. Any faction, any order, any power that moves against her moves against this crown. That is not a warning. It is a fact." He looked at Sarah. "Set the ceremony for tonight." Sarah, who was never surprised, looked surprised. "Tonight? Is there a reason to wait?" Sarah looked at Elara. Elara looked back. "No," Elara said. "There is no reason to wait." The marking ceremony was held in the great hall at midnight. The hearth was banked high, and the flames cast long shadows across the pelts and the stone. The entire pack was present, warriors and healers and craftspeople and children who should have been in bed but were not, because no one could bring themselves to deny them this. Elara stood before Darius in the firelight, wearing the green silk dress, her hair curling around her jaw, her silver-burned wrists still bandaged, but healing. She was thin. She was scarred. She was not the Luna anyone had imagined for the Northern King. She was exactly the Luna the Northern King needed. He held her face in both hands, the way he had in the workshop on the day she cried. He tilted her head to the side, baring her neck, and she let him, and the vulnerability of it, the willingness, the trust, sent a shiver through the bond that she felt in every thread. His mouth found the curve where her neck met her shoulder. She felt his teeth, the elongated canines of a wolf in human form, press against her skin. He bit. Deep. The pain was sharp and real and faded almost instantly into something else, something that was not pain at all but completion, the closing of a circuit, the tying of a final knot. She felt the mark form, not just on her skin, but through the bond, through all 30 threads, a seal, a signature, an absolute. "Mine," he said against her neck. "Mine," she said back, and meant it. The hall erupted. Howls, not the polite, ceremonial howls she had expected, but raw, wild, joyous sounds, torn from 100 throats, the sound of a pack welcoming its Luna. Gregor stood in the back, under guard, watching. His face was unreadable, but his eyes, those small, too-close-together eyes, were wet. In the weeks that followed, the Northern Realm reorganized itself around a new reality. Elara was Luna. The White Wolf bloodline was not extinct. The Silver Order was real and active, and Serra's intelligence network was hunting them methodically, a task made easier by the fact that several of Varen's former allies had cracked under questioning and provided names. Varen herself remained confined to her quarters. Ilara visited her once on a cold morning when frost rimed the workshop windows. She brought fabric a bolt of midnight blue silk that was the exact shade of Varen's favorite gown. Varen looked at the silk and then at Ilara, and something complicated moved behind her eyes. Why, Varen asked. Because you are still his family, Ilara said. And because I understand doing terrible things out of fear. I lived with fear for 22 years. It makes you small. It makes you cruel. But it does not make you irredeemable. Varen did not respond for a long time. Then she reached out and touched the silk with her fingertips the way Ilara had touched the caravel silk on that first day, testing the weave, the weight, the quality. It is very fine, Varen said. Yes. Another silence. Then you are better at this than I expected. At what? Grace Varen said. I did not think an Omega thread mender would know anything about it. I was wrong. It was not forgiveness, not on either side, but it was a door left open just slightly, and Ilara was, if nothing else, a woman who understood the value of leaving seams unfinished so they could be altered later. Spring came to the northern capital. The frost retreated, the carved staircases filled with meltwater and then with sunlight. Ilara's workshop hummed with activity, not mending, but creation tapestries and garments, and woven pieces that glowed with wolf-light and became gradually the most sought-after textiles in the territory. She trained 2 apprentices, both young Omegas from border packs who had been told their entire lives that they were worthless. Darius wore the cloak to every council meeting. It had become without either of them intending it a symbol. The bond made visible. The thread that held. On the first warm evening of spring, Ilara sat in her workshop with the windows open. The air smelled of thawing earth and the cedar smoke from the hearth below, and the particular green scent of new growth that she had never smelled before. The capital, because Ashvale's closet room had smelled only of laundry steam. She was working on a small piece. An embroidered panel similar to the one she had made months ago, the one with the white wolves that glowed, but this one showed something different. She heard him before she saw him. Not his footsteps, he was still uncannily silent for his size, but his heartbeat. Through the bond, the steady measured rhythm that had become as familiar to her as her own breathing. He stood in the doorway and watched her work. She let him watch. She had learned to be comfortable with his attention, the way she had learned to be comfortable with the bond itself, gradually, in stages, like wading into water, that was deeper than it first appeared. "What are you making?" he asked. "Come and see." He crossed the room and stood behind her, his chest against her back, his chin resting on the top of her head. She felt him go still as he looked at the panel in her hands. She had embroidered 2 wolves, one black, one white. They were curled around each other in the center of the fabric, their forms intertwined, and between them, barely visible unless you knew to look, was a third shape. Small, half-formed, the beginnings of something new. "Ilara," he said. His voice was different. Careful, as if he was holding something fragile in his mouth. She took his hand and placed it flat against her stomach where the first faint pulse of a new bond had been growing for 2 weeks. Not one of the 30 threads between them. Something else. Something entirely its own. 3 heartbeats. Hers, his. And one so new it was barely more than a whisper, a thread just beginning to be spun. Darius's hand trembled against her. The Alpha King, who had walked through walls and terrified armies, and knelt in workshops whose wolf could shatter stone with a snarl, stood behind his mate, with his palm against her belly and his face pressed into her hair, and shook. She covered his hand with hers. The bond sang between them, all 30 threads, humming in a harmony that had no name. Outside the workshop window, the evening light turned the mountain city to copper and gold, and somewhere in the streets below, a child laughed, and somewhere in the forests beyond, a wolf howled, and in the workshop full of thread and looms and beautiful things, Elara pressed her needle through the fabric, one final time, pulled the thread taut, and tied the knot.